Channels are a unique way to edit your photos in Affinity Photo, and using these you can get more advanced in your technique at editing certain tones of the photo. So in our select menu bar, we actually can go ahead and select different tones. So there's midtones, shadows, and highlights. And a unique feature that I love is being able to create custom selections that you can modify within a photo and keep those selections for later. So why don't I show by example by going to tonal range in the select menu and hitting select highlights. You will want to make sure, it looks like I need to select the layer first. So make sure you select the layer you're wanting to get the selection for first, and then go to select highlights. You'll see the photo select the highlights of the image, or what it sees as the highlights. So each image will vary in the selection, but it does a lot of the hard work for you. And you'll want to open up the channels panel. If you don't have that open, it's in View, Studio, and then Channels. And from this selection, you can either go ahead and create a new selection as a spare channel. You can save one, or you can right click on this pixel selection icon here and do the same thing. So I'll hit create spare channel, and it'll be called spare channel by default. You can name it. So I'll call this one highlights, and we're going to do it for each spectrum of the tone range in the photo. So I'll go ahead and make a midtone and a shadows as well. So I'll go back to the background layer, and I deselected by hitting Command D on my keyboard. I'm on a Mac, so on a PC I think that would be Control D. So we'll go to select again, and we want to go to the tonal range, and I'll just go down the line. So midtones is next. I'll go back to channels and right click on that pixel selection icon, create spare channel, rename that one to midtones, and deselect. You can go to select, deselect, or Command D in my case. And once more, let's do the shadows. So I'll select this layer, go to select, tonal range, and shadows. So you'll see there's less shadows in this image because it's fairly bright. And then we'll just do that same thing. So we'll right click here, create spare channel, right click, rename, and call it shadows. Okay, so with that done, you can go ahead and create edits to this photo, but you have to think in terms of the channels you've made. So say for the highlights, I want to bring out the highlights more in this photo. We can add an unsharp mask filter to do so. So I'll actually do it from the layers panel just to show a different way of doing it. You'll click this icon here, and we'll go to, where is it at? Unsharp mask, or we'll actually do a high pass filter. I spoke wrong there. So then we'll increase this radius quite a bit. It's going to bring in quite a bit of stuff, and we just want to increase that a tad. You can go pretty far here because you can just modify this layer later, but you don't need that much, I think, in this case. So let's say about 8 pixels worth. Let's go straight to 8. So with that selected, you can go back to your channels panel, and on the highlights layer, right click again, and you'll see this new field that will say load to high pass alpha. So what this means is any edit or filter you pass in to your layers here, and they need to be on their own layer, mind you, you can go ahead and filter that through that channel. So it's kind of a little confusing, but what it does is basically just only affects that channel. So in our case, we only want to affect the highlights by using this high pass filter. So I'll go ahead and right click that and then load it to high pass alpha, and you'll see it kind of take shape there. Obviously it's way too much for what we need, so we can bring it back and maybe use a different blend mode, so maybe linear light, and that's already looking better. So maybe bring back just a touch, like 90%, but if you toggle that, you'll see the effects taking place. So the shingles on this building are a little more sharp, just all the edges are just a tad more sharp, which is great. Really brings out the photo. So you could do the same with the shadows. Any type of filter will work. So let's do a different one for shadows, and we can do, say, an HSL adjustment. We'll just want to decrease the saturation overall, so I'll go ahead and do that to the photo, but I only want it to affect the shadows itself. So I'll desaturate that bit, go back to channels, I'll hit right click the shadows and we'll do load to the HL shift. So let's try that. HSL shift, I should say. And then with that gone, you can adjust it with another blend mode if you like, maybe just increasing that depth so it's a bit darker in the image or even lighter, depending on what you're going for. I think I like it darker, maybe like a soft light. So you'll see just the shadows become a bit more shadow, but still maintain their shadow-like qualities. And you can adjust this just by using the opacity filter where you see fit. So feel free to experiment with different blend modes, opacities, all those things. So let's add one more for our midtones. Let's do a curves on the midtones. So I'll increase this in a traditional maybe S curve pattern. Just kind of scoop the thing on either spectrum here. Okay, great. So I only want this to affect the midtones now. So to do that, I'll go back to channels, midtones, I'll right click and load that curves adjustment to the alpha image. So you can see where this allows you to get really creative with how you're editing your photos. So if I zoom in, we'll have all of these filters aligned. So our curves adjustment was the midtones. You'll see it kind of balance out there. And then we have our shadow adjustment, which makes the shadows just a touch darker. And then our clarity filter, which was for the highlights, adds considerable more contrast, which is what we're going for. So overall, you can adjust things in the photo that you would normally have to do for the full photo if you used a filter. But in this case, you can adjust it by grabbing different selections based on the channel you're going for. And you can also do this for color ranges. So there's red, greens, and blues in images. So you'll see these composite blue filters here that make up the image. They determine the full spectrum of the colors in the image later on after it's processed digitally. So red, green, and blue make up that path, and then there's all these variants of colors to make that up. So you can get very deep and technical with that, but all in all, this is a great way to have more control over certain aspects of your images that you'd like to ultimately edit and make look professional.